Why would a father, just weeks before his death, call his best friend in the middle of the night and whisper, "Don't let my son get the estate"? Why would a man like Rob Reiner, a Hollywood legend, a storyteller, a man who built his life around family, art, and legacy, feel the need to secretly rewrite his will and plead with Billy Crystal to guard it with his life? And more disturbingly, why, just days later, would that same man and his wife, Michelle, be found brutally stabbed to death in their $13.5 million Brentwood estate, the same home where their son Nick Reiner lived, steps away, in the guest house? This story isn't just shocking, it's haunting, and the deeper you go, the more disturbing it becomes. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because at the heart of it all lies a final wish. A desperate warning, and a betrayal that feels almost too tragic to be real. But this really happened. And Billy Crystal, the man America once called its comedic sweetheart, was suddenly thrust into the center of a real-life Hollywood thriller. Not a movie, not a script, but a plea from a dying friend, and a vow to honor it, no matter the cost. Let's rewind. Let's go back to the call that started it all. It was late November. Billy was at home, getting ready to leave for New York to host a special awards ceremony. He and Rob had just spoken a few days earlier. They joked, traded notes on Dodgers trades, and reminisced about their decades of friendship. Then, just as Billy was heading up the stairs for the night, his phone buzzed. Rob Reiner. Billy smiled, but what he heard on the other end wasn't laughter. It was fear. "Billy," Rob whispered, "I need you to promise me something. You're the only one I can trust." Billy froze. The tone in Rob's voice wasn't familiar. It wasn't the warm, witty voice he'd known since When Harry Met Sally. It was a man on edge. Tired. Scared. Billy asked what was going on. Rob took a breath. Then, slowly he said, "Don't let Nick get the estate. Think about that for a second. Let it sit. Not, make sure my family's taken care of. Not, honor my work. But a direct plea. Keep my son away from everything I built." Why? What kind of father makes a request like that? And why involve Billy Crystal? The truth, as you'll see in this expose, lies in years of pain, estrangement, and hidden fears, wrapped in a legacy that was crumbling behind the scenes. Rob and Billy weren't just friends. They were family. They had grown up together in the industry. Rob, the director, the builder. Billy, the performer, the soul. They shared dinners, birthdays, laughs. Rob once called Billy the brother I found in the chaos of Hollywood. But that night, their conversation wasn't about movies or memories. It was about a will, and a warning, because something had changed. Rob had amended his estate quietly, privately, stripping his son Nick of any claim to the family fortune. And he wanted Billy to know. Why? Because Rob didn't trust anyone else to keep the truth alive. He feared Nick would fight it. He feared the clause would be contested, that someone would hide it, or worse, that Nick would find out before it could be protected. And in Rob's words, "If he gets it, he'll destroy everything I ever built." What makes a parent say that? And how did it come to this? Let's break it down. Rob Reiner was 78, a titan of film, known for shaping the emotional landscape of American cinema. Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, The Princess Bride. This is Spinal Tap. These weren't just films. They were generational bookmarks. Defining moments in culture, carved by Rob's vision. He was more than a director. He was a storyteller, a mentor, a symbol of legacy. His marriage to Michelle Singer lasted over 30 years, rare in Hollywood, where commitment often fades with spotlight. To the world, Rob was the good guy, a creative force, a family man. But inside those Brentwood gates, the picture was much darker. Nick Reiner, the only son, the heir, the enigma, 32 years old, born into privilege, raised in the glow of red carpets, private jets, and film sets, but also born into shadow. By his teens, Nick had already entered rehab. His struggle with addiction was well documented. Arrest records, therapy, family interventions. Rob tried everything. He funded multiple recovery programs, brought in specialists, even co-wrote a film with Nick about his son's journey through addiction, a cry for help wrapped in a screenplay. But despite Rob's efforts, something never quite healed. Friends close to the family described Nick as brilliant but unstable, polite at dinners, but volatile behind closed doors. One family friend recalled, Rob used to say, "I love my son, but I don't know who he is anymore." Over the last few years, tensions deepened. Nick moved into the guest house, a generous gesture from Rob, but one that quickly turned into a point of concern. Michelle reportedly asked Rob more than once, "Do you really think it's safe having him this close?" Then came the whispers, the threats, the arguments over money, the paranoia. Rob began locking the upstairs door at night, not because he feared intruders, but because he feared the person already living on the property. And that's when Rob made the change. The new will, the secret clause, the removal of Nick from all major estate inheritances, including intellectual property rights, investments, even the Brentwood home. Rob gave control to Romy, his daughter. An illegal document filed under coded trust names confirmed the change. But Rob didn't just want it on paper. He wanted someone watching it, someone the public trusted, someone untouchable, someone like Billy Crystal. Now stop and ask yourself, why would a man so revered, so loved, go to such extreme measures? What was he really afraid of? And more importantly, what did he know was coming? Because just 18 days after that phone call, Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were dead, brutally murdered in their Brentwood estate. Multiple stab wounds, sharp force injuries listed as cause of death. Time of death, Sunday, December 14th. The bodies were discovered not by neighbors, not by police on patrol, but by Romy, their daughter, who, according to reports, told the 911 dispatcher, "There's blood, they're gone, and I know who did it." Nick was arrested that same night. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He told officers he'd been asleep in the guest house, steps away from the carnage. And when asked about the estate, he said, "It's mine now, isn't it?" But here's the twist. The will that Rob wrote, the one he entrusted to Billy Crystal, had already been filed. Nick was cut out. Romy was the sole inheritor. And Billy? He was listed as an official witness to the amendment. Now it's a war between legacy and blood, between truth and cover-up. And what happened next would rip through the entire Hollywood community, dragging out secrets, evidence, and a final letter so shocking. Even Billy wasn't ready for it. Because this wasn't just a murder. This was a message. And someone didn't want that message getting out. What would you do if your phone rang just past midnight? And on the other end was your best friend, whispering like someone was listening? What if that friend, a man you had laughed with, cried with, worked with, grown old with, suddenly sounded afraid? Would you take it seriously? Would you think he'd had a bad dream? Or would you realize, too late, that this was a goodbye? That's exactly what happened to Billy Crystal. And everything that followed, the murders, the arrest, the chaos, all began with that single call. A call that Billy would replay over and over again in his head, wishing he had done something differently, that he had pushed harder, that he had asked the one question he was too stunned to ask at the time. "Rob, what are you so afraid of?" It was a quiet Saturday night in Los Angeles. Billy had just finished watching an old movie with Janice, his wife of over 50 years. They were laughing about something one of the grandkids said earlier that day. Nothing dramatic, nothing strange, just a typical, cozy evening. Billy was in his slippers, halfway up the stairs, when his phone rang. He looked down. Rob Reiner. It wasn't unusual. They talked all the time. But at midnight, that was rare. He answered, smiling, expecting a joke or a late-night rant about politics or baseball. What he got instead was silence, then a breath. Then, finally, Rob's voice. "Hey, you up?" Billy's smile faded. There was something in Rob's tone. A tremble. A wait. "Yeah. Everything okay?" Pause. Another breath. "Can I tell you something? And I need you to really hear me." That's when Billy sat down on the stairs. Because this wasn't the Rob Reiner he knew. This was a man unraveling. The first thing Rob said wasn't about work, or family, or even his health. It was about Nick. "He's not doing well." "Billy," Rob said quietly. "Worse than ever." Billy had heard this before, but never like this. "He's angry. He's saying things. Threats." Billy's heart dropped. "What kind of things?" Rob hesitated. "Stuff about legacy. The house. The money. He thinks he's owed something." Billy didn't say anything. He just let the silence fill the space. Then Rob added, "I changed the will." Billy blinked. "You what?" "I took him out. Completely." There was a beat of silence between them. Billy tried to process. "You mean the estate?" All of it. The trust. The royalties. Even the house. It all goes to Romy now. Billy let out a slow breath. Wow. I had to, Rob said. He's not stable, Billy. He's dangerous. I love him. God knows I love him. But he's not the boy I raised anymore. Billy could hear the pain in his voice. The guilt. The heartbreak. And then came the line. The one that would haunt him forever. Promise me something. Of course. If something happens to me, if anything ever looks suspicious, you make sure the clause is honored. You make sure he doesn't get his hands on it. Billy's stomach twisted. Rob, what are you saying? Another long pause. Then came the 5 words. Soft. Desperate. Final. I don't feel safe anymore. Billy tried to get more out of him, but Rob deflected. It's probably nothing. Maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe it's just late. But Billy knew better. This wasn't just paranoia. This was dread. And it was coming from a man who directed courtroom dramas and political thrillers, but now found himself living one. Before they hung up, Rob said something strange. I'm writing a letter. Just in case. I'll have it sent to you. Don't open it unless. He didn't finish the sentence. Billy never got to ask what unless meant. They said goodbye. And just like that, the call was over. Now pause for a second and ask yourself, what would you do if your best friend, a man you respected, admired, loved, told you he feared his own son? Would you call the police? Would you call the son? Would you fly over and confront him? Or would you wait? Billy didn't know what to do. He didn't want to escalate something that might have been a misunderstanding. He didn't want to betray Rob's trust. But what he didn't realize was that Rob had already put something in motion. A will, a clause, and a letter, postmarked and sealed, that would arrive just 2 days after Rob and Michelle were murdered. The next morning, Billy tried calling Rob again. No answer. He sent a quick message. Thinking of you. Call me back when you can. But the phone stayed silent. And that silence was the beginning of the end. Because something had shifted. Rob Reiner, who had spent a lifetime making others feel safe through storytelling, couldn't even feel safe in his own home. And that's when Billy realized this wasn't just about money or legacy. This was about survival. Rob's fear wasn't unfounded. He knew his son. He had seen the rage, the manipulation, the charm that turned on and off like a faucet. And most importantly, he had seen the obsession. Nick didn't just want love. He wanted control. Control of the house, the trust, the name, the Reiner empire. And when he found out he wasn't getting it, the consequences were catastrophic. Billy would later tell investigators that Rob had sounded not just worried, but resigned. He knew something was coming, Billy said. He just didn't know when. But someone else did know. Someone else had been watching, waiting, and listening. And that someone may have been a lot closer than anyone expected. Because what Rob didn't realize, or maybe what he feared the most, was that the very walls around him weren't protecting him anymore. They were closing in. And soon, a horrifying truth would be uncovered. One that made Billy question whether the will was ever enough to stop what was already in motion. Because here's what wasn't known at the time. Nick Reiner had already been snooping. 2 weeks before that final phone call. According to a confidential statement given by a former Reiner estate staff member, Nick had confronted his father in the kitchen. It wasn't violent. Not physically, but it was tense. He kept asking questions, the staffer later told police, about the estate, about what would happen when Mr. Reiner passed. It made everyone uncomfortable. And Rob, he brushed it off, publicly. But that night, he asked the security team to disable Nick's key card to the main house after 10 p.m. A quiet signal that something had changed. Rob Reiner, the man who had fought studios, networks, and critics for decades, was now fighting fear within his own home. And he couldn't win. After that final call with Billy, Rob reportedly grew more distant. Michelle, his wife, noticed it. According to one of her close friends, Michelle had confided something chilling just days before her death. Rob's not sleeping. He keeps the doors locked even when Nick's not home. He won't tell me everything, but he's scared. Think about that. A man with private security, cameras, legal firewalls, still terrified. Not of strangers, but of his own flesh and blood. And the only person he trusted? Billy Crystal, the man he laughed with at red carpets. The man who had once stood beside him at Romy's school recital. Now, that same man was being asked to guard a legacy. What does that kind of promise feel like? What's it like to hang up the phone and wonder if that was the last time you'd hear your friend alive? Billy didn't sleep much that night. He kept replaying the conversation. Don't let Nick get the estate. Promise me. I don't feel safe anymore. And more than anything else, those 5 words haunted him. Why would Rob say that? What did he mean? Was it a cry for help? Or had something already happened that made him certain Nick was beyond reason? Billy didn't know, but someone else might have. Romy Reiner. She had been visiting more often, checking on her parents. And privately, she'd been texting Billy. One of those texts, now part of the official case file, was sent the day before Rob's death. It read, "Dad's scared again. Nick's acting weird. He keeps asking about the trust. I don't like this." Billy replied, "Talk to your dad. I'm here if you need anything." Romy's response, "I tried. He won't open up. Says he took care of it." Took care of it. What did that mean? Had Rob anticipated something would go wrong? Did he think the will would be enough? Or was the letter, the one he mentioned on the phone, his final safety net? 2 days later, Billy got that letter. It arrived by courier. Sealed. Heavy. He didn't open it. Not yet. Something inside him said wait. He hadn't heard from Rob in 48 hours. Texts went unanswered. Calls rang out. Then came the headline. Director Rob Reiner and wife found dead in Brentwood home. Billy dropped the letter. It landed on the kitchen tile with a soft thud. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared. Because in that moment, everything became clear. Rob knew. He hadn't been paranoid. He hadn't been dramatic. He had been right. The police were called by Romy, who had stopped by that Sunday evening after getting a strange text from her father. Stay away from the house tonight. Everything's okay. Just stay away. It was the last message she'd ever received from him. When she arrived, the front door was locked. No lights. No movement. She used her spare key, walked inside, and froze. There was blood on the stairs. Then, a scream. Neighbors called 911 after hearing Romy's voice echoing into the night. By the time officers arrived, it was too late. Rob and Michelle were gone. Multiple stab wounds. Upstairs bedroom. Signs of a struggle. The house had not been broken into. But the guest house? Lights on. Curtains drawn. And inside, Nick Reiner. Nick was detained on the spot. No sign of a struggle on him. No injuries. But his clothing, his sweatshirt, had bloodstains. He claimed they were from cutting himself shaving. In the middle of the night, the police didn't buy it. And the moment they told him his parents were dead, his first words were, "So what happens to the house now?" Not what. Not oh my God. Not even who did this. But what happens to the house now? That's when detectives knew. This wasn't grief. It was calculation. Billy flew to LA the next day. He went straight to the police station, told them everything. The call, the will, the warning, and finally, the letter. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single page, handwritten, signed, dated. It read, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. I don't know how, or when, or what it will look like, but I know it's coming. Nick is not well. He will not stop. You have to protect Romy. You have to protect what I've built. I'm sorry to ask this of you, but you're the only one I trust." Signed, Rob. Billy read it twice, then handed it to detectives. He didn't cry, but he did whisper something. "I should have done more." Now let's be honest. You'd think that would be the end of the story. You'd think the will is solid, the warning was clear, the suspect is in custody. But it wasn't that simple. Because what came next would shock even Billy Crystal and turn a closed case into a media firestorm. Was Nick Reiner born broken? Or did something along the way quietly fracture him? That's the question investigators, journalists, and even people who knew the family well have been asking, because the public image of Nick Reiner and the private reality could not be further apart. On paper, he was the lucky one, the only son of a Hollywood legend, born into comfort, opportunity, access. But behind the gates of the Brentwood estate, behind the smiles at premieres and charity dinners, lived a man many described with the same unsettling phrase, unpredictable. And unpredictability, when mixed with resentment and entitlement, is a dangerous thing. Nick Reiner grew up surrounded by greatness. His grandfather was Carl Reiner, comedy royalty. His father was Rob Reiner, a director whose films shaped generations. Nick didn't just inherit a famous last name. He inherited expectations. From the moment he could walk, people assumed he would follow in the family footsteps. Acting, writing, directing, something creative, something brilliant. And for a while, it looked like he might. As a child, Nick was described as bright and charismatic, quick-witted, funny, a natural presence in a room. But even then, there were cracks. Teachers noted mood swings, explosive reactions to criticism, a need to dominate conversations. Nothing alarming on its own, until it became a pattern. By his teens, that pattern had hardened. According to multiple former classmates, Nick hated being compared to his father, not because he didn't admire Rob, but because he resented him. He wanted the recognition without the process, one former friend said. He wanted the applause without the grind. And when that didn't happen, the anger came out. Substance abuse followed shortly after. At first, it was brushed off as experimentation, then as teenage rebellion. But by the time Nick was in his early 20s, it was clear this wasn't a phase. There were multiple stints in rehab, interventions, relapses. Rob stood by him, every time, paid for treatment, covered legal trouble, quietly smoothed over incidents that could have ended much worse. And publicly, Rob defended his son fiercely. He's struggling, Rob once said in an interview. But he's my son, and I believe in him. That loyalty never wavered. But privately, it was exhausting. Nick's relationship with his parents became transactional. When things were good, he was charming, affectionate, apologetic. When things didn't go his way, the rage surfaced. Neighbors at the Brentwood estate later reported hearing shouting matches late at night, not constant, but intense when they happened. Arguments about money, about independence, about what he deserved. One particularly troubling incident occurred just a year before the murders. Nick allegedly screamed at Rob during a family dinner, accusing him of hoarding the legacy and treating him like a liability. Michelle reportedly left the room in tears. Romy didn't speak to her brother for weeks afterward. And yet, Rob still let Nick stay. Why? Because Rob believed in redemption. Because Rob believed family meant endurance. Because Rob believed love could fix what anger had broken. But love can only stretch so far. The guest house became Nick's world. Physically close. Emotionally distant. He lived just steps away from his parents. Close enough to watch. To listen. To feel included without actually being involved. And according to investigators, that proximity may have intensified everything. Nick wasn't just aware of his parents' wealth. He was obsessed with it. He asked about the house constantly. The trust. The royalties from Rob's films. He wanted timelines. How much is the estate worth? What happens when you're gone? Why does Romy get a say? These weren't casual questions. They were interrogations. Romy saw it before anyone else did. She had moved out years earlier, building a life of her own. She visited often, but each visit came with tension. She was scared of him, one family friend said. Not physically at first. Emotionally. Psychologically. Romy reportedly told friends that Nick would stare at her during arguments, silent, seething, as if calculating something. And when Rob rewrote the will, Nick changed. This is where things take a darker turn. According to a forensic review of Nick's phone, his search history shifted dramatically in the weeks before the murders. He wasn't searching for jobs or recovery programs. He was searching for how to contest a will, what makes a will invalid, estate disputes, sibling rights. At the same time, he began asking estate staff oddly specific questions. What documents does Dad keep locked away? Who has access to the safe? Where are the legal files stored? Staff members brushed it off until one of them overheard Nick muttering something chilling. He thinks he can erase me. Erase me. That phrase would come up again. Nick didn't see the will change as a boundary. He saw it as betrayal. To him, Rob wasn't protecting the legacy. He was stealing it. And in Nick's mind, stolen things could be taken back. Let's pause here and ask something uncomfortable. How much responsibility does a parent have when their adult child becomes dangerous? Rob tried everything. Support, therapy, boundaries. But he never cut Nick off completely. And some experts now argue that decision, made out of love, may have fueled Nick's sense of entitlement even further. Because when consequences are delayed long enough, they stop feeling real. By the time Rob confided in Billy Crystal, Nick had already begun isolating himself. He stopped attending family gatherings, stopped responding to Romy's messages. And then, suddenly, he started hovering again, watching, listening. He'd appear unexpectedly in the main house, sit silently at the kitchen table. One staffer recalled Nick once saying, "Everything here belongs to me anyway." When asked what he meant, Nick just smiled. The night of the murders didn't come out of nowhere. It came at the end of a long emotional collapse. Nick knew something had changed. He felt it in the way Rob avoided him, in the locked doors, in the tension that filled every room. And most importantly, he sensed that his future was slipping away. The will wasn't just paperwork. To Nick, it was an execution, a declaration that he was no longer wanted, no longer trusted, no longer included. And that's when resentment turns into something else, something final. Detectives would later describe Nick as emotionally detached during questioning. No tears, no shock, just irritation. He asked about timelines, procedures, and yes, the estate. But here's the part that unsettled investigators the most. When asked about his relationship with his father, Nick didn't describe love. He described ownership. He was my dad, Nick said. He owed me. That single phrase reframed everything. Nick didn't believe he was being disinherited. He believed something was being taken from him. And people who feel robbed often convince themselves they're justified in taking it back, by any means necessary. But even with all this, even with the warning signs, no one imagined what would come next. Because hidden in Nick's guest house, investigators would soon discover something that shattered the remaining doubt. Something written, something personal, something that showed the shift from resentment to resolve. And when they opened it, they realized the final conversation wasn't just a warning. It was a countdown. How does a man go from shaping the heart of Hollywood to dying in fear with his own son steps away? How does a beloved director, someone who gave the world hope, laughter, romance, end up whispering warnings, changing his will in secret, and living behind locked doors? The answer begins not with tragedy, but with triumph. Because before the horror, before the betrayal, Rob Reiner was everyone's dad. Let's rewind. Not to the crime, not to the fall, but to the rise. Rob Reiner didn't inherit Hollywood. He earned it. Yes, his father was Carl Reiner, a comedy legend in his own right. But Rob forged his path not by coasting, but by crafting, by storytelling. His early fame came as an actor, meathead on All in the Family, a role that made him a household name. But Rob wanted more. He didn't want to play the stories. He wanted to build them. And that's exactly what he did. Think about this filmography. Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, each one a cultural moment. Each one a different genre. Each one a testament to Rob's incredible range. Few directors can jump from horror to romance to courtroom drama and nail every single one. But Rob did. And he did it without ego, without scandal, without the usual chaos that clings to Hollywood legends. He was respected, admired, loved. Behind the scenes, everyone who worked with Rob said the same thing. He listened. He cared. He made you feel safe. And yet, that same man, the one who made the world feel safe, couldn't feel safe in his own home. Rob's reputation wasn't built overnight. He didn't just direct his actors. He mentored them. He helped shape careers. Meg Ryan, Tom Cruise, Billy Crystal, Jack Nicholson. He believed in collaboration, not control. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He was thoughtful, curious, empathetic. The kind of man who asked how your mom was doing and meant it. But here's the contradiction that haunted Rob his entire life. He could fix other people's problems, but not the one in his own family. When Nick began spiraling in his teens, Rob took it personally. Not in an angry way, but in a heartbroken way. He blamed himself. He asked where he went wrong. He wondered if his career had stolen too much time. He used to say, "I was out saving other characters and forgot to save my own son," said one close friend. But Rob didn't give up. He threw himself into Nick's recovery with the same intensity he brought to directing. There were family counseling sessions, trips to detox facilities, sleepless nights reviewing treatment plans. At one point, Rob even co-wrote a film with Nick, a semi-autobiographical piece about addiction, redemption, and fatherhood. It was meant to heal them. And for a moment it did. But the piece didn't last. Rob once told an interviewer, "Parenting doesn't stop when your kid turns 18. It gets harder. You're watching someone try to carry the weight of your name, and sometimes that weight crushes them." Nick wasn't just a son. He was a shadow. And as Rob's light grew brighter in Hollywood, Nick's resentment grew deeper. That's the cruel irony, isn't it? The more Rob succeeded, the more Nick felt like he was failing. In public, Rob never wavered. He praised Nick. He defended him. He believed in the possibility of change. Privately, though, he was drowning. Friends said he began to withdraw in recent years. He stopped hosting dinner parties, turned down speaking engagements. He didn't want to be away from home, not because he was needed, but because he was watching. The Brentwood estate, a sprawling mansion worth over $13 million, was supposed to be their sanctuary, a place for quiet, comfort, retirement. Instead, it became a pressure cooker. Rob and Michelle in the main house, Nick in the guest house, and the air, always tense. Security was tightened. Locks were changed, not for burglars, but for someone already inside. It was Rob who made the call to install new cameras. He told staff not to discuss finances around Nick. He asked his assistant to reroute bank statements to a different address. All signs of a man bracing for impact. And yet, he said nothing publicly. Why? Because Rob Reiner had spent a lifetime crafting stories about heroes. And he couldn't bear to admit that his own might not have a happy ending. That's what makes this story so heartbreaking. Rob wasn't a bad father. He was a desperate one. He fought for Nick, believed in Nick, bet everything on Nick, over and over again, until finally, in the last year of his life, he realized he couldn't afford to be wrong again. The day Rob changed his will was quiet. No announcement, no press, no drama. He met with his longtime lawyer, signed the amendment, left clear instructions. Romy would inherit the estate. Billy Crystal would be notified. And Nick? Nick would receive nothing. No trust, no access, no rights to intellectual property, not even the guest house. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of protection. Rob was protecting the legacy he built, the daughter he loved, the people who would carry on his name. He was trying to do in death what he couldn't do in life. But here's the twist. Even in that moment, even as he signed away his son's inheritance, Rob still hesitated. He asked his lawyer, "Is there a way back from this, if he gets better?" Because some part of him still held out hope. Even as the locks clicked, even as the cameras turned, even as the trust documents were sealed, Rob still wanted a future where Nick healed, where the Reiners came together, where the story ended peacefully. But real life doesn't always follow the script. And Rob Reiner's final chapter was not written in a studio. It was written in blood. After the murders, tributes flooded in. Celebrities, directors, co-stars. They called Rob a giant, a mentor, the soul of Hollywood. Billy Crystal posted a black and white photo of them laughing behind the scenes of When Harry Met Sally. His caption, "He made the world feel safe. I wish we could have done the same for him." That post went viral. Millions of likes, thousands of comments. But none of it could undo what had happened. None of it could bring him back. And none of it could explain why, just weeks before his death, Rob had looked over his shoulder while on the phone with Billy, as if someone might be listening. Because someone was. And what Rob didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Nick wasn't just angry. He was preparing. And deep in that guest house, behind locked doors and shuttered windows, he was already planning the unthinkable. What would push a father to cut his son out of everything? Not just reduce his share, not just delay the inheritance, but erase him completely from the future, from the legacy, from the trust, from the home? It wasn't just a financial decision. It was emotional. It was protective. And in Rob Reiner's case, it was urgent. Because when he changed his will, he did it in secret. No fanfare. No big meeting. Not even a heads up to Nick. It was swift, decisive, and buried in a sealed amendment. And now we know why. Because Rob wasn't trying to punish his son. He was trying to survive him. The meeting took place in a small, private law office in Santa Monica, not the one Rob had used for most of his Hollywood-related contracts. No entourage, no assistants. Just Rob, his longtime estate attorney, and a file folder with 2 pages. On those 2 pages, the complete restructuring of the Reiner family fortune. In this new document, referred to legally as Amendment C, Rob revoked the prior heir designations that included Nick. He listed Romy as the sole primary beneficiary, not just of physical property like the Brentwood estate, but of intellectual property, film royalties, private holdings, and the voting power in the Reiner family trust. Nick wasn't just excluded. He was denied influence. Rob didn't want him having a seat at the table. He didn't want him managing rights to his movies. He didn't want him using the Reiner name to control anything. And at the bottom of the second page, Rob had handwritten a note. for the preservation of legacy and peace. Powerful words. But what exactly was Rob trying to preserve, and from what? To understand the timing of this change, we have to go back 3 months before the murders. It was late September. Rob had been planning a small family gathering for his birthday. Nothing extravagant, just his closest friends, Michelle, Romy, and, yes, even Nick. He wanted peace, but peace didn't come. According to multiple sources, the dinner ended in a heated exchange between Rob and Nick after a casual comment about retirement and future planning. Nick reportedly said, "So when's the money train stop? Or do I have to wait until you're in the ground?" Guests thought he was joking. Rob didn't. He left the table, spent the rest of the evening in his office. That night, according to a staff member, Rob told Michelle, "He's not getting it. Not a cent. I won't let him ruin it." Less than a week later, the appointment to amend the will was booked. Now here's the twist most people don't know. The clause that removed Nick was more than just a line of text. It was watertight. Rob instructed his lawyer to add what's known as a no-contest clause. That means if Nick tried to challenge the will in court, he wouldn't just lose the case. He'd lose any potential remaining rights he might have had, including even minor family trust access or emergency funds. In legal terms, Rob made the clause poison pill proof. He was sending a message, not just to Nick, but to anyone who might try to undo his final wish. But Rob wasn't done. He made one more move. He sent a copy of the amendment and a private letter to Billy Crystal. Why Billy? Because Rob didn't trust lawyers alone. He didn't trust systems. He trusted people. And Billy, in his words, was the only person who knew the real story. The only person who'd seen the private toll Nick's behavior had taken. Billy had watched Rob agonize for years, not just about finances, but about what kind of man his son was becoming. So Rob asked Billy not to hold the document, but to witness it emotionally, to remember the fear in his voice, to stand by the decision if it was ever questioned. And when Rob died, that letter would be the key to everything. Here's where the story gets even darker. According to documents later released in court, someone did try to access Rob's estate documents 2 weeks before the murder. A man, believed to be Nick, called the law office pretending to be an assistant. He asked about changes to the family trust, said Rob had asked for an emergency copy, gave the correct address and contact info. But the receptionist flagged the request. Rob hadn't mentioned a new assistant, and the voice sounded too young. She declined the request. When Rob was informed, he reportedly went silent for a moment, then simply said, "It's starting." That was the moment he knew. He was being watched. Not by paparazzi, not by the media, by his own son. And it was no longer just about money. It was about control. So what exactly was in the estate? Why was it such a point of obsession? Here's the breakdown. The Brentwood estate, $13.5 million. Royalties from Reiner's films, estimated $22 million. Equity stakes in production companies, including Castle Rock Entertainment, $10 to $15 million. Art, memorabilia, classic film rights, investments, and intellectual property, $20+ million. Family trust accounts and life insurance policies, estimated $8 million. Total estimated value, over $75 million. And Nick was written out of all of it. But he didn't know that yet. At least, not officially. Which raises a chilling question. Did he suspect? Did he find out? Or did he just feel it slipping away? Because something changed in Nick's behavior right after the amendment. He became erratic, less visible in the house, but more aggressive in his communication. He left voice messages on Romy's phone demanding his share. Accused Rob of rigging the family tree. Sent a cryptic text to Michelle that read, "If I'm not family, what am I?" That text, according to legal records, was forwarded by Michelle to Rob, along with the words, "This scares me." The amendment wasn't just legal. It was emotional. It was Rob finally setting a boundary, the kind he'd avoided for decades. But boundaries, when set too late, can sometimes spark explosions. And that's exactly what happened. Because while Rob had covered every legal loophole, he never expected his final chapter would be written not in a courtroom, but in his own home. Investigators would later say the amendment was the trigger. The moment Rob signed it, the fuse was lit. And someone in that house was just waiting for the spark. What happens when fear becomes fact? When the thing you prayed was just paranoia, knocks on your door in the dead of night? Rob Reiner knew something was coming. He felt it. He saw it. But no one, not even a man who spent a lifetime crafting suspenseful stories, could have scripted what actually happened inside the Brentwood estate on the night of Sunday, December 14th. Because this wasn't a burglary. This wasn't random. This was personal. And it all began with silence. December 14th, 2025, 7:42 p.m. The last confirmed communication from Rob Reiner was a text message to his daughter, Romy. Don't come over tonight. All's well. Love you. Short. Simple. But strange. Romy had been planning to swing by after dinner. Nothing unusual. A quick hello. Maybe help her mom wrap a few Christmas gifts. The message made her pause. All's well. It didn't sound like Rob. She replied, You sure? You sound off. No response. She texted again 10 minutes later. Still no answer. Then silence. 8:11 p.m. Guest house security camera disabled. According to police reports and home automation logs, the external security camera aimed at the guest house entrance was manually disabled at exactly 8:11 p.m. Not glitched. Not disconnected. Manually turned off. Investigators would later confirm that the control panel was located inside the guest house. Which raises the question, why would Nick disable the only camera aimed at his door? 8:19 p.m. Michelle's final phone call. At 8:19 p.m., Michelle Reiner called a friend, her college roommate, and left a brief voicemail. Her voice was calm, but distracted. Hey, just wanted to say hi. I think something's weird with Nick. Rob's talking to him now. I'll call you tomorrow. That was the last time anyone would ever hear her voice. 9:04 p.m. Panic button triggered. Inside the Reiner estate, a high-end security system included panic buttons discreetly installed in the master bedroom, office, and hallway. At 9:04 p.m., one of those buttons was triggered, the master bedroom. But here's where it gets chilling. The alert was canceled remotely just 17 seconds later. The company attempted to call the listed emergency contact, Rob's cell phone. No answer. A backup call was made to the house line. Also no answer. The security team logged it as a user error. But now, in hindsight, it was the moment Rob tried to cry out for help, and someone silenced it. 9:36 p.m., lights flicker, power surge detected. A brief power surge was recorded on the east side of the estate, tripping lights in the hallway outside the guest rooms. This may seem minor, until you realize that surge disabled the hallway security camera for 48 seconds. A window, a gap, and when the camera came back on, Rob and Michelle were gone. 10:02 p.m., Romy drives to the house. By now, Romy was uneasy. No replies, no calls, no good night texts from either parent, which they always sent. She grabbed her keys and drove. 12 minutes later, she was outside the Brentwood gates. And something immediately felt wrong. No lights in the house, but the guest house porch was lit. She used her gate code to enter, pulled into the driveway, walked up to the front door, knocked. Silence. 10:17 p.m. Romy uses her spare key. The door was locked, rare for a Sunday night. She used her spare. The first thing she noticed? The smell. Not overpowering, but metallic. Sharp. Then she saw it. A streak of red on the hallway wall. Her voice caught in her throat. Mom. She stepped inside, and that's when she saw it. Her mother, face down, motionless, a few feet away. Rob, his eyes still open, his hand outstretched, as if reaching for something. Romy screamed, loud enough that the neighbor across the street called 911. But Romy had already done that herself. 911, what's your emergency? Her voice, frantic. This is Romy Reiner. My parents. I think they've been killed. There's blood. Please, I think I know who did this. She never said the name out loud on the call, but police transcripts later confirmed. She told responding officers immediately that they needed to check the guest house. 10:26 p.m., police arrive. By the time LAPD officers entered the estate, the scene was frozen in time. 2 bodies, multiple stab wounds. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no valuables missing, no struggle, not in the usual sense. It was clinical. The only sign of a fight was Rob's hand, bruised, fingers bloodied, as if he had tried to grab or block something. But the rest? Still, precise, cold. 10:31 p.m. Officers enter the guest house. Nick Reiner was sitting on the couch, lights on, TV playing an old movie, The Princess Bride. He didn't stand, didn't run, didn't speak. He simply looked up and said, "Did someone call the cops?" One officer noted in their report. He seemed more annoyed than alarmed. Nick was asked where he had been that evening. He replied, "Here, all night." What? When told his parents were dead, his response was, "Wait, both of them." No emotion, just that. And then, the kicker. So what happens now? Who takes over everything? That was when they knew. This wasn't grief. It was calculation. Nick was detained on the spot. A preliminary test found traces of blood under his fingernails. His hoodie was damp, freshly laundered, but not dry. Investigators later discovered a set of clothes hidden behind a panel in the guest house closet. Blood-soaked, burned at the edges, partially melted in an attempt to destroy them. DNA tests confirmed. The blood belonged to Rob and Michelle. Back in the main house, detectives noticed something strange. In the master bedroom, near Rob's body, was a folder. Inside, the signed will amendment. Amendment C. Unmistakable. Next to it, a handwritten sticky note in Rob's handwriting. "Billy has the copy. This is for backup." Rob had known. He knew exactly what he was afraid of. And in his final act, amid panic, terror, and chaos, he tried to make sure the truth survived. The medical examiner later determined time of death between 9:05 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Multiple sharp force injuries. No signs of sedation. No drugs. Just brutality. The kind that comes from rage. From betrayal. From someone who wants to send a message. But here's the most chilling detail of all. There was no sign of forced entry because there didn't need to be. Nick had a key. He knew the layout. He knew where the cameras were. He knew how to kill, without a sound. Hollywood had lost a legend. But what most people didn't realize was that it wasn't just a murder. It was an execution of trust. A father, slain in the very house he built. By the very person he tried, and failed, to save. And yet, the mystery wasn't over. Because while Nick was in custody, claiming innocence, a strange document surfaced. One that Nick had written weeks earlier. Titled, in bold black ink, "What They Took From Me." And inside that disturbing document was a plan. A detailed, handwritten plan that would reveal just how long Nick had been waiting, and how far he was willing to go to reclaim what he thought was his. What do you do when the unthinkable becomes real? When you're standing in your childhood home, ankle deep in blood, looking down at the lifeless bodies of the people who raised you, knowing exactly who did it. That's the moment Rob Reiner found herself in. And the decision she made next didn't just shock detectives. It cracked the case wide open. Because unlike so many families who drown in denial when one of their own does the unthinkable, Romy didn't hesitate. She pointed to the guest house, and she said, "You need to arrest my brother." Let's go back to the moment officers arrived. The front door was still ajar. Romy was outside, pacing in circles, hands covered in blood, her own parents' blood. Her voice was shaking, but her words were clear. "They're upstairs. They're gone. Please help me." One officer stayed with her. Another two moved inside, and what they found matched Romy's terror. 2 bodies, multiple stab wounds, no signs of forced entry. But it was the way the house was arranged that made officers pause. Nothing stolen, nothing overturned. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal, and Romy already knew it. In the first interview at the scene, Officer Blake Monroe asked her, "Romy, do you have any idea who might have done this?" Her response, "Yes. I told my dad this would happen. I told him Nick wasn't stable. I told him." She trailed off. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she stared directly into Monroe's eyes and said, "You need to talk to my brother." Now, at the station, just 3 hours after the bodies were found, Romy sat down with 2 detectives, tape recorder running. The transcript from that conversation reads like a diary entry spilled in real time. Raw, heartbreaking, and damning. Let's walk through it. Detective 1. "Romy, we understand you're in shock. But anything you can share right now might help. When was the last time you spoke to your parents?" "Romy, earlier today. Around noon. Mom called to ask what dessert to bring for my friend's dinner. Totally normal." Detective 2. "Any tension? Anything odd in her voice?" "Romy, no. But Dad texted me later, telling me not to come over tonight. That was weird." Detective 1. "Did he say why?" "Romy, no. Just said all's well. Love you." That's not how he usually signs off. Detective 2. Why do you think he said that? Romy. Because Nick was there. She went on to explain that in the weeks leading up to the murders, things had been escalating. Nick was acting stranger than usual. Isolating. Brooding. Asking intrusive questions about the estate. Romy said she warned her father multiple times. I told him to put some space between them. I begged him to get Nick off the property. But Dad kept saying, he's my son. I can't give up on him. That sentence alone sent chills through the room, because it painted the entire story in a new light. Rob Reiner hadn't been clueless. He had seen the signs. He just hadn't been able to believe the worst. Until the worst was lying at his feet. Romy revealed that Nick had confronted her just days before the murders. He cornered her outside the main house while she was visiting. She described the encounter to detectives. He looked different, cold, like someone I didn't recognize. Then he asked, "Is it true?" She played dumb. "Is what true?" Nick pressed. "Did Dad cut me out?" Romy panicked. She hadn't been told officially, but she knew. She had heard enough whispers, seen enough avoidance. But instead of lying, she nodded. That's when Nick said, "He'll regret it. Trust me. They both will." Romy told her father that night, begged him to do something. Rob promised he'd take care of it. He never told her how. But the very next day, Billy Crystal received a copy of the will amendment. Rob was moving to protect the legacy. But for Romy, it was already too late. Detectives pressed further. "Do you think Nick is capable of this?" Romy didn't flinch. "Yes." They asked why. She said Nick had always carried anger, not just toward their parents, but toward the entire world. He thinks the world owes him something, she explained. He can be sweet, but when things don't go his way, it's like a switch flips. She shared text messages, voicemails, even an email Nick sent her a week before the murders, reading. What kind of person asks about inheritance before the bodies are even cold? What kind of man watches officers carry his parents out in black body bags and says nothing? Nick Reiner wasn't just arrested that night. He was unmasked. And what investigators found in the following hours, his behavior, his reactions, the items in his guest house, painted a picture more terrifying than anyone expected. Because Nick didn't act shocked. He didn't cry. He didn't ask what happened. He simply looked up from the couch and said, "Did someone call the cops?" Let's walk through what happened minute by minute after the arrest. 10:31 p.m. Officers knock on the door of the guest house. Nick doesn't rush to answer. He doesn't ask what's going on. He opens it calmly, sleepy-eyed, slight smirk. "Is there a problem?" he asks. When told his parents were dead, his face doesn't change. He doesn't ask how or why. He asks, "So, who gets the estate now?" A rookie officer later admitted, "I'd never seen anything like it. Not grief, not even shock, just calculation." 10:39 p.m. Nick is handcuffed and escorted to a police cruiser. Still no resistance. Still no emotion. But one officer noticed something strange as they placed him in the back seat. Nick was humming, just a low, soft tune. What song? Investigators later identified it from the body cam footage. "My Way" by Frank Sinatra. Let that sink in, as his parents' bodies were wheeled away. He was humming a song about doing things his way. 11:12 p.m. Booking begins at LAPD's West Division. Nick answers every question, name, date of birth, address, with robotic calm. He never asks about a lawyer, never calls family, never even mentions Romy. His only request? "Can I get my laptop back when this is over?" By morning, the station was flooded. Press vans, reporters, fans in disbelief. This wasn't just a murder. It was a betrayal of Hollywood royalty. Inside the station, Nick sat in a holding room. Blank stare, hands folded. Detectives came in with evidence bags, clothing, security footage, text messages. Still, Nick said nothing. That's when they asked the question, "Nick, do you understand why you're here?" His response, a slow shrug. Then, finally, "I assume it's about the will." Detective Sanders leaned forward. "What do you know about the will?" Nick looked up for the first time, smiled, and said, "I know it was unfair." No denial, no confusion, just a statement of motive. Over the next 72 hours, investigators combed through the guest house. What they found changed everything. Behind a wall panel, hidden, but not well, was a plastic container. Inside, a partially burned hoodie, gloves, a folding knife, a burner phone, and a leather-bound journal. We've talked about the journal before, but now, investigators had the real thing, and its contents were damning. Let's look at a few selected pages from the case file. Page 3. They never saw me. Only saw what they wanted. A failure. A liability. Not a son. Page 7. He said he cut me out. Fine. Then I cut back. Page 11. A list titled, Clean Cut, 3-Step Solution. 1. Power surge disables cams. 2. Remove threats, quiet, fast. 3. Control the story. Page 14. Sketch of the main house. Labeled entry points. Camera positions marked with red XS. Page 21. No one gets what's mine. Not Romy. Not anyone. The evidence was overwhelming. But Nick still wasn't talking. He refused to speak without a lawyer, which finally, after a day of silence, he requested. His defense? Temporary insanity. His lawyer claimed Nick had a dissociative episode, triggered by years of family trauma and emotional neglect. But prosecutors had something stronger. Intent, motive, premeditation, and most chilling of all, cold silence in the face of death. The media dubbed Nick the Heir of Ice. Headlines screamed, Hollywood horror, son kills legendary director. Reiner's legacy shattered by own blood. Nick Reiner's arrest stuns film industry. The public wanted answers. But Nick? He just sat there, waiting, as if none of it surprised him. Because deep down, maybe it didn't. Maybe he had always known it would come to this. But what Nick didn't know was that Romy had more than just suspicions. She had proof. And when she handed over that thumb drive to investigators, the one with the secret audio clip, it captured something no one expected. A voice, a confession, a threat. And suddenly, Nick's silence wasn't just disturbing. It was strategic, because he knew what was on that drive. And he knew, once it was played, there'd be no walking back what he said. What do people Google when no one's watching? What someone types into a search bar late at night, alone, angry, spiraling, says more about them than any staged interview, any court testimony, any carefully worded statement. And when LAPD's digital forensics team began digging into Nick Reiner's devices, they weren't just looking for emails or files. They were looking for intent. And what they found in Nick's search history left even the most seasoned detectives stunned. Because long before the murders, long before the estate documents were signed, Nick had already begun his descent into obsession. And he left breadcrumbs everywhere. Let's start with the basics. 3 devices were recovered from Nick's guest house. A personal laptop, MacBook Pro, 2022. A tablet, iPad Air, synced with his iCloud. A second, older Android phone, disconnected, but still functional. All were examined under warrant. What came back wasn't just disturbing. It was strategic. Nick had been preparing for something. And every typed word, every late-night query, told a story. Timeline, October, December 2025. This was the key window. Right after the tense birthday dinner. Right after Romy's warning texts. Right after Rob began making estate changes. Nick's search history during this period paints a picture of a man spiraling, not aimlessly, but with precision. Here are just a few entries. What happens if you're removed from a will? Can wills be contested after death? California estate law, disinheritance. How to get a forensic copy of a trust. How to prove mental instability in elder family members. And then, how to fake a break-in. How to disable security cameras remotely. How much blood is in the human body? Where is the carotid artery? How long does it take to bleed out? Let that last one sit for a second. Because up until that point, you could have argued he was just curious, anxious, preparing for a legal fight. But that search, that was about murder. No interpretation, no wiggle room, just pure, calculated intent. Detectives found more. Bookmarks, saved threads from dark web forums, discussions about inheritance disputes, anonymous message boards discussing family elimination strategies, most too graphic to describe, and one file, downloaded and renamed, Exit Plan V2.pdf, a document copied from a subreddit where a user had laid out, step by step, how to disappear after a crime involving close relatives. Nick had highlighted sections, added notes in the margins. He wasn't fantasizing. He was studying. Then came the videos. A folder labeled simply, Research. Inside, surveillance footage tutorials, DIY knife-making clips, Video breakdowns of famous unsolved murders, with handwritten timestamps and notes. And the most chilling file of all, a screen recording of him watching the estate planning video Romy had posted weeks earlier, where she casually mentioned how much their home was worth. Nick rewound that part 5 times.